Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Hi, Drafting the Past listeners. I'm your host, Kate Carpenter, and this is a podcast all about the craft of writing history. In most episodes, I interview an author of nonfiction history about their research and writing process. But in today's episode, we get to do something a little different. We're taking a closer look at how authors and presses get the word out about new books. And we're going to do that with an insider's perspective. I'm very excited to be joined in this episode by Sonya Bonczek, the Director of Publicity and Communications for the University of North Carolina Press.
Thank you for having me. It's my very first podcast. I'm very excited to be here.
I have exchanged many emails with Sonya over the past few years whenever I have podcast guests who've published with UNC Press. And I have been impressed at the great publicity work Sonya and her team are doing. So when I thought about who might be able to bring us a publicist's perspective, she was first on my list. I'll let you tell her more about her career path and how she ended up in her current position. And then we'll dive into questions, including a few that were submitted by podcast supporters on Patreon. I was eager to hear from Sonya about how book publicity has changed throughout her career, what works and what doesn't, what she wishes more authors knew, and how she's feeling about the state of the book industry today, especially when it comes to nonfiction history. Here's my conversation with Sonya Bonczek.
So I've been in book publishing for almost 20 years now, which is really wild when I say that out loud. I started my career in commercial book publishing. So I worked at Random House and I worked at Hachette Book Group in various imprints, which was great. It was really a big crash course in big national book media. I've always been in publicity. And then I spent a few years outside of book publishing, working in PR for a couple of different startups and also at a marketing agency, and not for long because I realized very quickly that I don't want to do PR for real estate agent companies and random business buzzwords and just work on accounts. I was quickly bored and just didn't want to shill that stuff, and have always loved books and have always wanted to talk about the books and ideas and stories and history and culture and all of that. So once I moved over into university press world, I started working at Harvard University Press when we lived in Boston. And I fell in love with working with scholars and historians and just folks who are researching things that actually matter and can really help shape public understanding and sometimes public policy. I love being in university press world and can't imagine not being a book publicist. And I didn't even know book publicist was a thing. I think growing up, everybody knows that there's editors and you can go be a publisher. And I think being a book publicist is probably the coolest job you could ever have. And when I think back to young Sonya, always reading and loving just the smell of books and living in libraries, I love that that is my job. So my family relocated to Chapel Hill, North Carolina from Boston a couple of years ago, right at the start of the pandemic. And I kind of just knocked on UNC Press's door. I was still working remotely for Harvard. And I loved UNC Press's list and the books that we publish, especially in African American history. And so I just was you guys should hire me, and just started conversations. And the timing really worked out with their publicity director retiring after almost 20 years at UNC Press. So timing worked out, and that was over 5 years ago. And so I've been at UNC Press ever since and can't see myself leaving anytime soon.
Fantastic. Honestly, this is making me think I have chosen the wrong career because that sounds fantastic. Tell me, what does a book publicist do? What does kind of the day in, day out of that job mean?
Well, publicity is fun because it's different every day. And things can happen, and then my to-do list never gets done and I have to focus on something else. But I would say it's really a mix of strategy and writing, pitches, relationship building. There's a lot of different juggling. And on any given day, we're pitching book media and reviewers and journalists and trying to book podcast interviews and planning events and prepping authors or writing press material. Like on fun days, there's actually meetings we have in person, or when I'm up in New York for a sales conference or media calls with our seasonal catalogs where I'm doing in-person media calls and pitches. That's always fun. But it's a lot of invisible work. Like it is a lot of emails. I live in my emails, a lot of follow-ups and a lot of long lead planning because we're currently just started our spring, summer 2026 season. But we still have books that just published from the fall season that I'm still actively working on and working with those authors. But then we've already had our big like marketing launch for the fall, winter 2026. And then soon we'll have meetings to talk about books that will be coming out, next, spring, summer 2027. So we're just constantly living in the past, in the present, in the future, and thinking about our backlist, our current list, our front list. So our attention is kind of pulled in all these different directions, but it's fun because I, get to read manuscripts and proposals that come in for books that our editors are trying to acquire and weigh in on what I think of those proposals and manuscripts and what I think from a marketing and publicity perspective. Then I have a call with an author to talk about, their book coming out and the questions that they have and how we can best work together. Or then I have a meeting with someone who runs programming at a museum or a different venue or a bookstore to talk about our list and, what we have for them and what might work. But it's a lot of emails. It's always making sure I'm responding to any time-sensitive emails, especially from media, which we always want to make sure we're getting to. It's a lot of sending out galleys, advanced review copies, a lot of PDFs, uploading a lot of PDFs, and just kind of seeing where the day brings you. And there's always something urgent or time sensitive that kind of ends up in our inboxes that we have to make sure we're focusing on.
So I have what feels like kind of a basic question, but I'm sure I'm not alone in this confusion, which is what's the difference between book publicity and book marketing? Or is there a difference?
No, I mean, there is, but I'm all about holistic like integration, and because the lines are blurred, I think the simplest way to put it is publicity is earned media and like what other people are saying about you, about your book, and we're not paying them. So reviews, interviews, op-eds, like all this coverage that we can get. And marketing is more focused on paid media, so advertising. And then there's digital marketing, which is social media campaigns and giveaways and email marketing and that type of stuff. But honestly, like the lines are completely blurred. And my role has evolved a little bit from publicist here, but also taking on a comms role and really looking at digital marketing as well as social media, because I think being a publicist now, I mean, half my job is on social media. Like I'm on social media personally to mostly talk about my books and the work that I do. And then, I'm helping with UNC Press's social media and content. And I, because reviews space are shrinking and there's less of that traditional media coverage, there are things we have to do to think outside the box, like a virtual flash panel on an important topic and trying to kind of organize that. That has always been less of like a publicity job. A publicist is really responsible for media, but now I'm thinking of other creative ways too, to kind of sell the book or to get coverage and attention for the book. So I think everybody is working in tandem. And so like I am the publicist, I am just one piece of the big marketing puzzle. And we have different folks in our marketing department at UNC Press who handle, the advertising and the digital advertising, awards and conferences. We have an academic marketing specialist who is submitting the books for awards, making sure that those books are at all of the conferences. We have our sales manager who's really focused on having relationships with our sales reps, and then of course our bookstore accounts, and is tracking all those sales. But we all have to work together, and I need to understand what they're doing, and they need to kind of understand what I'm doing. And if I have big media planned or something big happening for my books, I'm making sure that our sales knows, because our sales reps need to know so that they can inform the bookstores and the accounts, like something big is happening, you want to be stocked up with this book, or that our marketing team knows that we can lean into that stuff and make more hay with a review or something big happening, whether it's advertising or social media and things like that. So it's all one big ecosystem.
That's really helpful to think about sort of the constellation of people that is working on all these different components.
Yeah. The publicist kind of ends up being like the conduit to all those questions, because, once the book is written, and the manuscript is transmitted and we're like working towards those page proof stages, the publicist is kind of becomes the main contact for the author, and authors have those questions too. Like, who handles like award submissions? I want to make sure my book is, submitted to these following awards. And I'm like, oh, that's my colleague, Anne, but I can, make sure that I'm passing along anything you need, to her, or sharing her info if you want to have a one-on-one with that. So I'm kind of the conduit and making sure everybody knows what's going on and answering the author's many questions about all the aspects of marketing.
I'm intrigued what you mentioned about sort of taking on some of that communications and especially digital media role, because I have noticed that UNC Press has really stepped up its social media game lately. The Instagram account is full of entertaining content lately, which is super fun. I bet also a lot of work to do behind the scenes. Is that, it seems like you guys really feel like that's a place that's worth putting some more energy into. Is that, do you see a lot of potential there?
I do. You've caught me at a moment too, where I'm really understanding that how just the content overload and saturation of content, especially now with AI everywhere and just like slop that you see, and people are just churning out content at insane speeds. And so our TikToks and reels that we do, which are so fun. I'm a theater child, and this is like one of the most fun parts of my job too. And it doesn't take us we try not to spend too much time on the silly videos. We really come up with those quickly in the spur of the moment when we're working in the office, and we 1 or 2 takes and we're done. But I think all of that is really good and important, just visibility. I hate to be like, oh, our brand matters, but I do, we have so many authors and scholars following us. And I think it's really nice for them to kind of see the inner workings and to like have us weigh in on something. And even if it's just us jumping on a meme or a trend, but we're including a book, or we're showing a book, or we have a book poster in the background, I think all of that is really helpful. So, you almost can't get away without being online and on social, even though I get the fatigue and the fragmentation. And if you caught me a couple of years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, I'd be like, oh my gosh, every author needs to be on Twitter, right? And they need to be doing Twitter threads. And this is how we get op-eds. I always called it from thread to op-ed, because I had so many authors who would go on Twitter, and there would be so many journalists out there, and they would do a thread contextualizing something really important that they're expert on. And that was, breaking news at the time. And I would have editors at The Atlantic or even the New York Times email me and say, oh, this thread, is this your author? Can they just write this op-ed for us? And that was like the glorious Twitter heyday, the beautiful golden age. And we really saw pre-orders. Like, we would see an author share something even about their book and get a ton of engagement. And then we could directly go look at pre-orders and see a spike over the weekend or like a couple of days around that tweet. So now, a couple of years later, with everybody, with TikTok and now social media like Blue Sky, Threads, just like being on every platform, X, like now going viral or doing, having a tweet or a thread, a post go viral, it's not translating to sales as much, because I think people are just inundated now with this content. So I think now it's more about finding your niche content. And we've seen this with some of our own social media, like our TikToks and our Reels. We have seen that when we are focused or doing something a little more niche that's like about peer review, like a TikTok about peer review, we're getting way more engagement, because I think there are so many, professional scholars who follow us who like really are interested in that topic. Whereas, if we do something a little more generalized, it's like, okay, maybe that's funny, and, people scroll through. So I think with content saturation, I think it's going to be so important for anyone, publishers, authors promoting books, to get as specific as possible, to like lean into niche. And that's something I think you do with your podcast. This is not just a podcast to talk to authors about their books, but you're talking about the craft in the art of writing. And I think that's wonderful. And I think that's like where niche is like where to go, and really tailored to knowing who your audience is and what kind of message you're trying to put out there. But I'm glad you watch our social media content, because it's fun. I got to say, it's super fun to do.
It's fun to watch. And you make a good point that like it seems beneficial for authors and potential authors, because I feel like it makes me feel connected to real life people at UNC Press and not just sort of like the press as a monolithic entity.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like there's a person behind all of the online accounts. Like I got to give a shout out to bookshop.org. I don't go on Threads that much, but they're killing it on Threads. And I think like they recently had a post that was like, there's a person behind this account running it. And it was, talking about things going on in Minneapolis and ICE. And it was just so, and I think people really responded and connected to that. And that's rule number one of social media. And I tell my authors this, if they are on social media or they're even interested, I'm like, it's all about being genuine and being yourself and not getting on there once in a blue moon and like posting the link to your book and telling people to order it or trying to kind of sell your book that way. Cause that just, it's not for selling things. That's for sure. So social media is obviously very important, but it's a lot of work and it's the wild, wild west.
I mean, this dovetails well with a larger question from a listener who asks, how have the publicity resources of presses changed since you entered the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed. I think because when I started too, there was just more publicity. There was more print review sections and newspaper editors that you could pitch and have relationships with. And now, I mean, teams are leaner. We have 2 publicists and a publicity assistant. That's including myself here at UNC Press. And we publish, 140, 150 books a year. So, there's just leaner teams and there's outlets are fewer. So we're focused on other things, but the job itself is still really expanded enormously because now publicity is including social media and podcasts are, and like everyone has a podcast and there's a podcast for every topic and every author and book and with newsletters and the metadata, like there's so much to do. So, especially university press teams are very small, but I would say incredibly nimble. And I think we do a lot with more limited resources. And of course, don't get me started on like budgets. I mean, we're a nonprofit and we're a mission-driven publisher. And so sales matter, but there's something even greater there that I think we all care about, but we still do, need to pay our employees. So it's changed, but I don't know. Like I said, I've been in the industry for so long and it's always felt like a lot. Just so much to do. And so prioritization and like really focusing on things that matter is important. And our authors are so crucial in the promotion game. I tell every author I get on a Zoom with when I first meet them, like I'm the publicist here at the University Press. You are your own best publicist. Like you are going to be, and I'm going to put you to work and you have to, it's a full-time job, I think, for authors to promote their books, but it's really going to make a difference.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is what do you wish authors knew about publicity? So that seems like thing number one, right? That they are the true publicist of their book.
Yeah. Just that they are their best publicist and promoting a book is a full-time job on top of their actual jobs. Yeah, because they need to use their network and they have networks. They have family, friends, colleagues, people in their corner who are ready and excited to support them and their book's publication. And so it's things I tell my author, like, you have people who are like, I'm going to buy your book as soon as it comes out. And it's really helpful and important to share information with them. Like, hey, pre-orders are really important. They signal a lot to the publisher, to a bookstore. And so, you have people in your corner who are more than happy to pre-order a book if they learn, pre-orders really matter rather than kind of waiting for the book to come out. And there's so many things you can encourage people to do, like go on Amazon. Even if you're not going to buy your book from Amazon, people shop on there and people read the reviews. And if you have more of those 5-star reviews and people leaving them, like that helps with that algorithm and discoverability. And I think a lot of authors know this, but when they have personal connections somewhere in the media, at a venue, at a bookstore, it's going to be so much more meaningful if those people and places hear from the author directly, rather than from a publicist, who's, again, if I'm working on 60 books, if we're publishing 60 books in one season, we kind of have to think of the list more holistically because we can't, pitch 60 books to one journalist or 60 books to one bookstore. Not that we would ever do that, or anyone would expect that. But authors who have connections, or like I'll get an email sometimes like, oh, maybe we can, can you pitch this outlet or this person? I was on the show like 2 years ago. And I'm like, okay, you have that contact. You have the producer in your inbox. And the best way to do this is for you to email them, and you can copy me in because I'm more than happy to follow up, to send marketing materials, to send a review copy, to share additional information. But you're the relation, like they know you, they've had you on. And so it's going to be much more bespoke and meaningful if you put together a nice email that's like, hey, I really enjoyed being on your show. I have a new book coming out. I thought this would be, this topic would be of interest. Here's why. I'm copying in, my book publicist. She can get you a review copy, page proofs immediately. And that's always going to be the most helpful and the best collaboration. And so I put my authors to work. I'm like, no, you're emailing them. And I like to share my kind of, my pitch list. It'll be like a shared Google, spreadsheet of like, here are my contacts and here are the people I'm pitching and here's people I've met in person with or maybe have relationships with. And then I'm like, please go in there and add in your contacts or make a note if you know this person. And it's better if they hear from you, maybe. So it really, again, it's all collaboration. But I think authors have all of the tools at their fingertips because I don't have a special, like in 2026, so many journalists and editors and reviewers, you can find their email easily. Like you can find, what they are covering, what their beat is. They have their own websites. You can find most of that information. And I think it's going to be so helpful for an author if they want to see their book covered or featured in a specific outlet, that they are very familiar with that outlet, that they read that magazine, that they know who they're pitching there and that the book kind of fits and why. Reaching out to media with the author doing that and taking the lead a little bit where it makes sense, I see just so much more ROI on that than publicists like sending more general kind of pitch. And there are also, a lot of like opinions editors when we're trying to pitch op-eds that just want to hear directly from the author rather than kind of get a pitch from a publicist and go back and forth. And op-eds is a whole nother topic that I could go on and on about. But yeah, I think that's the most, like you are so capable and like there's so much promotion and work that you can do, but it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I get that.
So I have another listener question that I suspect they would like me to ask right at this moment, which is, what advice do you have then for authors who struggle with the idea of self-promotion, that does not come naturally to them?
Well, the not coming naturally to them, I would just reframe that because I'm assuming they kind of were like, oh, I don't want the attention on me and I'm not trying to promote myself. But you have to think of it as like your ideas matter and your book matters and the scholarship that you are pushing and trying to get out there is really important. And it your book is contributing something really meaningful. And so talking about it is really part of that work. So you have to do that. Going back to social media, like I never push my authors. If they don't do social media, you don't need to make a Blue Sky account and go on there and try to like post about your book. That's not going to go anywhere. And, authors have there are many authors I work with who have no social media presence, whose books do beautifully, who have their own networks, who are being invited to conferences, who are peer reviewing other scholars' work, who are blurbing other books, who have connections that are in, they're using them, and that pays off tremendously. And they don't need to be on social. It's really about what you want to get out of it. And if you do have time, and like I just had a call with an author who's like, I'm actually going to be on leave this semester when my book comes out, so I can focus on like doing the threads on Blue Sky and, because she has a big platform there and like, making sure that I'm reaching out to all my contacts and that I'm setting up even just like drinks with someone who has a connection to this person for, at the New York Times. And that is, beautiful. And I totally understand that that's not possible for every author and scholar and professor who's like has a, full load that semester and many, many obligations and duties. So, do as little as you can, as much as you can. But I would say if you can make it at least a part-time job, like 6 months before your book is coming out and not when your book is out. And then being like, okay, I'm here, like I'm ready to come, do an event or write an op-ed or, do a post about my book like that, the work has to start early. The best way to do that is kind of collaborating with your publicist on like, okay, what can I be doing on my end? Which is great. And a lot of authors ask me that, and I'm always happy to tell them, there's a lot you can do.
Are there, say I am an author or a potential author who doesn't immediately have a book coming out, but I know I want to be sort of a well-rounded author when it comes to be that time. Are there skills that you wish authors would sort of work to develop or build up before they are in the position to do publicity?
Probably the biggest skill would be translation, being able to clearly talk about your book. We joke about this all the time on our socials too, about how marketing is always trying to just like in 2 or 3 sentences, the key selling points after like a book that's like 10 years of research and has so many nuances and elements to it. And we're just trying to simplify it and not dumb it down, but really just the clarity. Because especially with media, it's about getting your foot in the door, and it's about connecting the dots to things happening now, using your scholarship to explain how we got to this moment or things like that. It's really important to clarify. And, I see this a lot because we ask on our marketing questionnaire authors, we ask, what are the talking points, or like, what are the 3 most important parts of your book? And, answers vary, and sometimes they get into the weeds, and you have to just kind of pull that stuff out. So I think, and I ask editors this when they're pitching books or we're launching a book or we're talking about, I'm like, okay, what's the 2-sentence pitch? Like why this book matters, why it's important, or like what significant scholarship is it bringing to the table? And so I think authors could really work on how they talk about their books to the public. My really good friend, Amanda Ice, she's a publicist at Harvard University Press who did a podcast like this. And she, I think, said it best, where she said, I stole this from her because I was like, I've never heard that. She's like, she tells her authors, imagine you're teaching like 18-year-olds. You're teaching a high school class and you want to explain some convoluted method or scholarship, and you want them to be engaged and interested. Like, how would you talk about it? And to kind of like keep that, perspective in mind when you're trying to talk about your book or pitch your book or do an interview or a podcast interview, is like talk in those kind of terms of like, what would like some really, smart, eager, interested, like 18-year-olds, like what would they want to know? And what could you say that would really hook them? And I thought that was really smart way to put it.
I want to do a little myth busting, maybe. I'm curious. Are there things that people think sell a lot of books in terms of publicity or marketing that actually are not particularly effective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what sells books these days because it takes a lot to sell a book. You have to see something many times, just as consumers who shop, like it is so hard to actually like get you to press that buy button. And it definitely doesn't come from like seeing, one review or seeing like an ad. Ads don't work at all. But that's also another topic. So I think everyone like, every time I buy a book or start reading a book for pleasure, it's always because I have a friend who's recommended it. And like, maybe it's because I've seen a lot of buzz about the book and I've already seen different reviews and coverage, but I won't buy it until friends and I start talking about it. Or I'm like, oh, this is right up my alley. But it's mostly friends. I'd say almost like 99% is people I know who are reading it or have read it. So word of mouth is so unbelievably important. But yeah, I think like ads, QR codes, like we're asked to make a lot of graphics with the QR code. And like then when we go to actually check like how many people have scanned, it's like virtually 0. So I think just even knowing that like book reviews don't move sales, like even big ones in the New York Times. And this is, of course, why we see like the Washington Post book world folding and just the review space shrinking so much, is like they just are, it's subscription fatigue is real. Like you have to, they're behind a paywall for great reason because, journalists are not paid well and, writers should be paid for their work. But I think people generally are not reading the reviews as much. So I think just knowing that it takes how hard it is to sell a book, especially to someone you don't know, which is like why advertising doesn't work. Selling a book to someone you do know is so much easier. And that's why we're like pushing, hey, okay, you have a network on Facebook, like you have a bunch of family and friends and people who follow you, like then that's your place. And you post about your book and you have 300 responses saying like, this is so exciting, I'm going to buy your book. that's going to work. Those are people that know you, or like, are your cousin's best friend and people who know of you. And it's so much easier to sell a book that way. But, it takes so much to sell a book. And that's what we try to focus on, is like, that's why like we're booking events. We're trying to get the op-eds published. We're trying to get as many podcast interviews, especially to like your niche audience, and think about like, who is your audience? And from working in trade back in the day, like even back then when we had The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and we had not Stephen Colbert, we had David Letterman. And for some, our big celebrity authors who are writing, publishing their autobiographies, even back then, it was like very early on taught to me, Dave Letterman doesn't sell books. The Daily Show with Jon Stewart does, because the audience is watching those shows. So people are watching late night. They're not necessarily people who are then need to go buy whatever book is being promoted, unless they're huge fans of the celebrity, right? Whereas The Daily Show is kind of a different audience, and they are more book buyers and nonfiction readers. And so you're going to sell more copies that way. But we don't say no to Dave Letterman because it's David Letterman, right? It's broadcast. And all of that is important for visibility and discoverability. And just remembering it takes a lot to get that book sale. So I've had authors kind of disappointed when they've had New York Times or The Guardian or like a bunch of op-eds running or media coverage kind of happening, which is all terrific. And then they're like, okay, where are the orders, or how many books did we sell? And we can kind of go look, and it's like, oh, there was one pre-order at the time. And that happens. It's common now because books are a luxury item. Like they're expensive, especially academic books, especially books published by university press books. It's a lot to, buy a book that's $32.95. It's a lot. So I tell my academic authors too, and like they know this, like course adoption is so important. Library sales is so important. So there's that whole other aspect of book publicity that we need to focus on too.
I want to switch gears a little because this is a writing podcast. I want to talk about writing in your job, because it strikes me that writing is a lot of your job, whether it's in the form of emails or copy that will be part of, I don't know, do you write press releases still that go out to people? How do you approach that kind of writing? What does your writing process look like?
Well, I like to joke that those who can't write become book publicists. No, I love the writing aspect to my job, and I love it even more because I get to I guess it's more of the editing that I really love, because I get to take catalog and cover copy and the author's words and kind of rearrange them. So it is a lot of workshopping that I like to do. But we publicists are writing constantly, not just emails, but we are writing pitches and we're writing talking points, especially for like broadcast. Or when I'm pitching NPR or even a podcast, I try to do some bullet points or try to say like in an interview, here's what can be discussed, and try to make that as concise and specific as possible, and really answering that question all the time. I'm thinking when I'm writing a pitch is like, why does this matter right now? So I think a lot of my job in writing is trying to translate more of the complex scholarship into something that's kind of urgent and clear for a journalist or producer. So I'm not even trying to use flowy language. And I'm really trying to be blunt and candid and specific and not hyperbolic at all. And I don't try to say this fantastic, amazing scholarship is groundbreaking and but really trying to connect the dots to why a reporter would be interested in not just this book, but outside of the book, like the themes here or how this relates to what they're covering and what their readers are interested in. But we write a lot. But again, I the safety and the knowledge of knowing that my writing is not being published, like my pitches and emails hopefully are not being published or broadcast anywhere. But we do, publicists also, and I weigh in on like the cover copy, and I will look at taglines and key selling points and other things that are going out to the public, and from a marketing perspective of like, is this the best tagline, or like, are we starting this off strong and really hitting like the most important parts of why we're publishing this book? So that's fun.
Do you ever get books that are hard to sell?
Yes.
I did not prepare you for this question.
No, I mean, like, be more specific, because like I said, all books are hard to sell. Lots of books are hard to sell. But okay, so we can talk about like the books that we designate as academic books, like for other professionals and scholars, and then what we kind of designate as trade books. And then we even have the in between. So, for our trade books, we are picturing those books as like a little bit more accessibly written and books that we think are a really important topic or the author has a platform, but again, accessibly written and where we think we could get more mainstream attention for it, that bookstores would want to carry it in their stores. Because in 2026, like there are many university press books and scholarly books and trade books that are the main channel is Amazon. And thank God for bookshop.org and other places. But bookstores, independent bookstores are also struggling. And so they're not carrying as much stock. And if you ever walk into a bookshop, like I like to go into a bookstore and see how people shop and what they're picking up and putting back down and what they like eventually go, to the register with and actually purchase. And it is so hard. It is so hard to, sell books. So anyways, for our trade, like we, are prioritizing and thinking about our whole catalog. And of course, the front list books where we are hoping the print run is larger, or we do think that there is a bigger audience for it and potentially more sales. We're trying to focus on those. But I will tell you, there are academic books by like first-time books that do incredibly well. Because again, I think like those authors and they're focused on what sells and what works. And so much of that is course adoption and it being taught. And it's not a flash in the pan. It can happen. It takes time. It's slower. Where a couple of years later, like this is the book that's on everybody's syllabus and is, and that's hundreds and hundreds of that's a lot of sales, or focusing on libraries and other places like that. So sorry, your original question of like, are there books that don't sell? There's always like book publishing is like baseball, in my opinion, where sometimes you're just like, I don't know what the heck's going to happen. You can't predict a book that's going to take off. And then sometimes in like seventh inning, there's a home run all of a sudden and everyone's scrambling to be like, what? I have gotten so many emails from the New Yorker, Washington Post, the New York Times, asking for a review copy of a scholarly book that like we had at the back of the catalog that I never thought national media would be interested in. And they're like, we need a review copy of this, whether they're reviewing it or it fits into some coverage. And I'm like, what? And that's what publicists are good at, is pivoting. We kind of learn very early on in the season when we have our catalog and we blast it to media and we go to sales conference and we go to pitches and we start to get that information out. We start to get review copy requests and interest and start hearing pretty quickly. And so we kind of learn early on, like we'll start to get attention or like everybody's asking for a book. And we're like, oh, okay, this is like the book. We start to kind of hear that feedback early. And, we have to kind of make sure we're putting our resources to those books as well. I don't know. I mean, I think if anyone knew what sold and what didn't sell, like commercial publishers don't know. Like nobody knows anymore what book is going to get the attention, what book's going to break out, which one's going to be the dark horse. There are plenty of trade books that we have paid like a good advance to and have put in all the resources. And it's the first page of the catalog. And then doing a postmortem months later, it's like, we didn't get that review coverage we wanted. There's not as much review coverage space, but like we didn't, or even if we did, it didn't translate to sales. It doesn't always translate. So we're always surprised, sometimes pleasantly, many times not very pleasantly surprised with kind of how books do and what we can predict. But, we everybody's doing their best when we're looking at new projects and we're thinking about potential for selling that book. It's always a bit of a gamble, but we do what we can to kind of like try to make some predictions and make sure we're doing everything we can for all of our books.
I want to go back to something you said earlier. You sort of mentioned that op-eds are kind of a whole different beast, because a listener did say that she actually didn't even know how to frame it as a question, but that she felt sort of confused about like op-eds and excerpts and reported pieces and how that all even relates to books and book marketing and book publicity.
Yeah.
How do you think about those things?
Oh, yes. Well, I'll just start with op-eds. Op-eds, a lot of authors, especially like first-time authors, scholarly authors, kind of confuse op-eds with book essays. So they think they can just kind of write, 1,000 words, maybe, sometimes more, about kind of like the book and the argument. And there are plenty of places that are looking for longer pieces that are more analytical, that are kind of book essays. And then there's the op-eds, which is a whole different beast, right? You need like breaking news. You need something that's happening right now that's capturing everyone's attention. And then you need a strong argument. And usually, if you want to get into the New York Times, one, you have to kind of know how to write for places like that, but you have to be controversial. They want clicks, they want comments that are arguing with each other, and they want people sharing those op-eds and getting upset and getting angry. So writing op-eds is a very quick turnaround, and there is certainly an art to writing op-eds. Most of the time I'll get an op-ed draft and I'm like, you have to flip this completely. Like your whole argument and everything that's important and enlightening here and controversial is at the bottom of your piece. And you're kind of starting out with all the historical background and things that like you can't do. People are immediately like, eyes are going to glaze over, and it's too long. It has to be like 800 words if you're trying to do a quick op-ed. I've also have authors like saying, oh, yeah, there's this breaking news. I can maybe write this piece this weekend. And I'm like, it's Wednesday. If you can't write the piece in this hour, like if you can't write it now, or at least have the pitch and start doing outreach, like the headlines and the news cycle now is barely 24 hours. So op-eds is quick. It's of the moment. Something happens and you jump on it. And sometimes I work with authors at the beginning of the season, or their book will be coming out in a couple months, and I'm like, all right, maybe your book is timed to President's Day, so maybe just have like a framework, like have an op-ed kind of put together, whether you have kind of written it out and then you can go back when there's breaking news and plug things in. And this just recently happened, very recently, with an author who kind of had already pitched something to an outlet, kind of was accepted, and they're like, all right, let's work on this and time it to President's Day. And then there was breaking news, in January, and he jumped on it and was like, hey, actually this just happened and I can like rework this op-ed draft right now to make sure we're talking about this. And that was like accepted immediately. And that's how you have to do it. And op-eds too, like it has changed so much now. If you're kind of coming to your publicist to be like, I would like to have an op-ed somewhere, and I'm always like, okay, what op-ed? Like what's happening right now that you need to urgently write on or speak to? You have to like wait for the moment. And then it is actually important that authors pitch themselves. And I understand at like legacy outlets, it's like who's an op-ed reporter that you can pitch at New York Times. Like I have some contacts, but it's just so incredibly hard to get into the New York Times. And so going back and forth on like a piece to edit it to perfection, like you're kind of losing time. And unfortunately, places like New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and those outlets, like they have their own Rolodex of like experts and people they go to, right? They have their own columnists and their own op-ed writers. So it's really hard to do that. And I find the authors who are most successful are the ones who jump on things immediately, who work their way up, like starting with smaller places. And especially if the authors have a topic that's local to a specific city and then focusing on that newspaper and writing an editorial and op-ed there is a great way to go. And like, again, kind of what I said earlier about like all these contacts, information and emails is available online. So those are op-eds. And again, like I said, there's really an art to them. There's really an art to writing an op-ed. And so I want to kind of see that from authors. So I'm not saying it can't be done. And I've had plenty of like first-time authors who have successfully been able to pitch, write, and get an op-ed published. And again, that doesn't necessarily translate to sales. People will read an op-ed. It shouldn't be about your book, right? Your book's not going to be mentioned in it. There are some op-eds in places like The Conversation where you can kind of sneak that in and say like in my book or in other outlets. But most of the time, the point is to get it into your byline and to set the author up as an expert on this topic and someone who, has a really important perspective and understands the history, et cetera. So that's kind of op-eds. And then, reviews is reviews where someone is reviewing your book and talking about if it's good, if it's bad, what they liked, why it's important. And then there's more features, Q&As that we try to get published where we actually have a reporter, journalist interview the author about the book or about topics around the book. And then there's other type of coverage. And then there's other things authors can do. And then even doing like an NPR hit where you are just kind of an expert, or someone that they go to for a segment and it's a 30-second clip that you're in and part of a bigger story. They're not going to mention your book. Maybe we are always screaming and cheering when an author does something like that and you get the book in, right? Or like you get in Jenny Schuessler's column in the New York Times and she actually links to the book, because that's not ever guaranteed. And many times it's not included. And when it is, you're like, yes, this is amazing. This is wonderful visibility. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Like I said, she said she didn't even know how to phrase it as a question exactly.
Yeah, but I think it's really the op-ed, the op-ed thing, is hard because, again, it's not a book essay and there's such an art to it. And I've learned a lot along the way of working with authors to workshop op-eds, to pitch them, but they're so fast. And I will still send information or I'll have a Blue Sky thread kind of go viral and there's some breaking news and I'll send it to an op-ed editor. And most, I think the last time I did that, they were like, I don't think we can make this work right now, but let's keep in touch about this book. And it's a book that's coming out in the fall. And that's best case scenario because now you're on that op-ed editor's radar and they know you have a book on this topic. And so next time there's breaking news, they might remember and be like, oh, can your author write on this? And that's what I try to do is just keep some of those relationships alive since I can't pitch every op-ed of every author. But I really think our authors, for me, a sign when an author's like, can I write an op-ed and can you pitch it? I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work because authors need to kind of do that work. They need to jump on it because it could be 8 p.m. at night and something could happen. And if they're really interested in getting an op-ed published, they need to jump on that moment and start writing a pitch, pitching it out and social mediaing it. Because I think even today I got an email, CC'd on an email from an author who heard from a reporter who was like, oh, I really been enjoying your Blue Sky threads on this topic. And maybe we could work out an interview for this newspaper. So there are still reporters on social media who are scouring for content and seeing things and seeing people engaging and are using that to help with coverage. So
I mean, I guess that actually kind of leads to a bigger picture question and maybe a depressing one. But how are you feeling about the state of sort of the book universe today? We've mentioned the cuts to all of the review sections, the sort of decentralization of social media. A lot of people seem to be really anxious, especially about nonfiction. It seems to be hitting really hard there. How do you feel about all of that?
Well, I think people have been predicting the end of book publishing forever. I mean, when I started in book publishing in 2007, I think later that year, there was a New York Magazine cover story. I'll never forget it. And the headline was, "Is this the end of book publishing?" It was basically about the death of book publishing. Now, this is almost 20 years ago. And the best part of that is the author of that piece, Boris Kachka, he is still deeply embedded in the book world now. He's actually the books editor at The Atlantic. And before that, he was books editor at LA Times. And he's still writing about books and getting books out there and getting that coverage. And I think a lot of things in that article from a million years ago are the same things we're talking about now. And it was the big publishers conglomerating. And publishing is always in crisis. Every other newsletter or something I see about book publishing is we're in crisis. Books aren't selling. Nobody's reading anymore. No one has the attention spans. And I understand all that and see it, but I really believe in books and print books. Because then I was around when the Kindle came out and Amazon started blowing up and people were like, oh, there'll never be print books again. Everybody's going to be buying ebooks and reading on their digital devices. And I'm like, what are people going to put on their bookshelves? And now we see many years later and to this day, print still outsells the e-version. And I mean, don't get us wrong. We sell a lot of ebooks and I don't read them. I can't read on a Kindle. I've tried and I know it's convenient and people love it, but I do love holding a physical book. And you've seen now with everybody getting into romantasy and these genres and romantic fantasy, and you see the amazing additions, the deckled edges, the silver, these gorgeous. I just read The Loneliness of Sonya and Sunny, and it's a huge book. It's 700 pages, but it is so unbelievably beautiful to hold. There's just something so magical about those books. I just I do want to be realistic, but I also really just believe in books and people reading. And so like when people ask, are people reading less in general and less and like not reading fiction or nonfiction? I mean, I don't think so. Like, I think the people who love nonfiction are always going to read nonfiction. And I think the challenge now is more about attention. Like, again, content overload, competition is always a problem. And like the bar for compelling storytelling and writing is really high. But everything begins with a book. Like I'm dying to go see Wuthering Heights. And I read all the controversies there too. And it's not a great adaptation, but I really want to see it. Or like I'm dying to see Hamnet because I read the book. Everything starts with a book, like Heated Rivalry, blowing up, right? On HBO, like incredible. But like everything starts with a book. And I say that all the time. And I love working in books like for that reason. And I've seen like commentary lately of like, oh, book publishers used to be like the creators of culture, right? And they, and now kind of saying, but now they're just scrambling to keep up and things blow up on TikTok or wherever. And then they try to like make the books that fit into that moment. And I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. So I just, again, like things are scary, especially with AI and like how that's changing industries and not just like the slop out there, but when I think of being a book publicist, I'm like, am I always going to have a job? Like, will there always be a need for someone to like publicize if we don't have anywhere reviewing books? But I don't think so. Like our jobs is to connect the authors in the books, like not directly with the readers, although that's what we try to do through social media and other direct marketing, but like to the bookstores and the account and the people who then sell to the readers. But like there's always got to be someone connecting that to that and like sending the book copies out there, right? And like sending a review copy or a PDF. So I don't know. I don't plan to leave the book industry, and I'll be very curious to see it's a little terrifying, but I'm very curious to see what that looks like in another 20 years. If I'm still director of publicity at UNC Press in another 20 years, like what is my day-to-day job going to look like? But I don't think people are going to stop reading books, physical books, ebooks. I don't think they will. And everything cycles in and out. And you see now, like I get so much hope from like the kids who are profiled in the New York Times who have like said no to social, not just social, but cell phones. And they're like going back to the, old school landlines. So I'm hopeful that at some point the culture again will shift and people will just get so tired of doom scrolling and get back to reading. So I don't know. I want to be realistic about all the things, but I'll never not believe in books.
I love that note to end on. Sonya Bonczek, thanks so much for joining me on Drafting the Past. Thank you for revealing the secrets of book publicity for listeners.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks again to Sonya Bonczek for joining us for this episode of Drafting the Past. And thanks to you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this one as I did. If you think another writer friend might be interested in learning more about the publicity side of book publishing, text them a link to the episode. And as always, find show notes in the transcript at draftingthepast.com. You can also email me, Kate, at draftingthepast.com to let me know what you thought about the episode and what you'd like to hear in the future. And remember that before any book publicity can happen, friends don't let friends write boring history.